The title of my book is Everybody Calls My Father Father, the scandalous, passionate love affair between a Catholic priest and a Broadway actress. What inspired me to write this story is, well, the story is based on the true life love story of my parents. My mother was a Broadway actress and my father was a Catholic priest. And what I want to do is I want to show to the world what the church actually did to my mother to get her to leave my father. And I'm doing this in the hope that perhaps the Catholic Church will look at this ridiculous law. It's unnatural for priests not to be able to have families, and perhaps they will change it. So I'm bringing this all to light in this novel that I wrote, and because it's all based on the true life love story of my parents. There are other people in this book that are well-known people, like Paul Francis Webster. He was a Academy Award lyricist, and Vincent Rayo. Vincent Rayo was the consigliere for the Lucchese crime family. He was good friends with my mother and good friends with my father. And there are other actors that are real people in the book. And then, of course, there are some things that I just had to make up because my mother was no longer alive for me to get exact details. But what inspired me to write this story was when my mother and my father actually hid their relationship behind the church's back for 6 years. And he would go and do his priestly duties and then come home and play with us kids and stuff. And life was really good. Everything went along really fine until one day he had a heart attack. And basically, the church said to my mother, if you don't leave him, we're going to excommunicate him and not take care of him, and he will die, and it will be your fault that he died. Basically, they blackmailed her to leave him and not talk to him anymore, not talk to his friends. And she did that because she loved him so much and she wanted him to be alive. But unfortunately, the 6 years that they had spent together, she was no longer active in the theater. She no longer had that job. So she had to do some pretty amazing things in order to support us children. And what she did, she became the first woman cab driver in New York. She was a cab driver. And she worked at Woolworths as a waitress. And she did all of these things while taking care of us. The only problem was, this was like a 14-hour day job in order for her to have enough money to cover the rent and the food. And eventually, she had a nervous breakdown and went into the hospital. That's when my sister and myself were taken away from her and put into foster care. And we had to live in some pretty horrific situations. Some of these foster parents were really, really bad to us. And if it hadn't been for my mother's life lessons that she taught us, we would have never survived this. But we did because of her strength.
That's beautiful.
When my sister was 13 years old and I was 12, my mother was going to go back to New York and actually visit my father. She took my sister with her, and they went back and they met my father. And when my mother came back, she explained to me in detail all of the things that had happened, because at this particular juncture in my life, I didn't know anything about my father. I did not know that he was a Catholic priest. In any event, I was not able to go on that journey. But when I turned 18 years old, actually, let me back up. When I turned 17 years old, I had back surgery, and my mother was taking care of me for a really long period of time. During this time, we had extremely long, explicit conversations about her relationship with my father. Unbelievable stuff, she told me. She was absolutely, I told her actually at that time, you should write a book, And she says, well, you know, I would love to, but he's still alive and this would get him excommunicated, and she couldn't do that. So that was basically what was going on. And when I turned 18 years old, she went back to visit my father. We couldn't afford for me to go, unfortunately. So what I had done was I actually snuck into the Santa Anita racetrack at 18 years old, and I bet on a horse called Miss Musical because I was a musician at the time. And Miss Musical won. It was a 19-1 long shot. It won, and I won enough money to get on an airplane and fly back to New York, which is exactly what I did. And I got to go visit these friends of my mother. But the first thing my mother told me was she was very sorry to tell me this, but my father had died a month earlier. So actually I never got to meet him. But I did get to meet Rex O'Malley, an actor, and Vincent Rayo, the fellow who owned Vincent Rayo's restaurant. And it was quite an entertaining and enjoyable trip. But once I got over the crying part, because I cried my eyes out because I really wanted to meet my father. But that was basically a portion of what inspired me to later on write this story. So one of my main goals in writing this book was to get the Catholic Church to look at this horrible thing they're doing to priests. This should not be. According to the Bible, it doesn't say that priests can't marry and have children. This was done by the Catholic Church out of greed. They did it so they could make money, and they didn't have to spend that on their priest and their family. And there was a guy many years ago by the name of Martin Luther who got really, really upset about this and split from the Catholic Church and formed the Lutheran religion, the Protestant faith, in the 1300s, because he felt that if they did not do that and priests were not allowed to get married and have children, that there would be all kinds of abuse to choir boys and things like that. And he was 100% correct. So in writing this book, I really want to put this out to the world, and hopefully the Pope will read this book and get rid of this ridiculous rule that they have for celibacy. I mean, after all, the first Pope, the very first Pope, he had a wife and children. So when I was forcibly taken away from my mother and put into foster care and other really bad situations, there was a lot of really bad things going on to children. There was sexual abuse, there was being hit for no reason whatsoever, and this has stayed with me all these years. So I thought that part of the proceeds of this book should go to an organization that has fought against child abuse all around the world. And the name of that is Child Help USA. And they are a fantastic organization that helps children that have been abused by parents, relatives, or foster care, whatever. And they take them and they help them and they put them back on track to leading a happier life.